I'm so pleased to be chairing this critical session on gender empowerment and equity. I think we can all agree these are themes that are so inherent to so much of our work, and they've really majorly come up in so many of the presentations that we've heard thus far in this conference. But it's really fantastic to kind of have a standalone session on these topics. So we have a panel of 3, I think, today, or 4. We may have 4. So we're going to just get started with those of us that are those panelists that are in the room. And first up, we'll have Shweta Manohar from the International Food Policy Research Institute. Then we'll have Emily Vivian from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Then Ravinder Kumar from National Resources Institute, University of Greenwich. And hopefully we'll have Tammy Hope, an independent consultant, join us online. So Shweta, please join us. She'll be discussing reckoning with the inequities in agriculture, nutrition, health, research practices. Since we just have a few, maybe 3, we won't be so strict on the 10-minute time limit. But please hold your questions till the end, to the Q&A session. Thank you.
All right, it's nice to have a little bit more, maybe more time. Thank you. Yeah, there we are. Great. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here today to present on this scoping review that we've done, and the name of my talk is Reckoning with Inequities in Agriculture, Nutrition, and Health Research Practices. Okay, so I'm presenting this work on behalf of a great group of people who are actually part of the ANH working group on research and inequities in research practice. I have an extra and there. But it's a great group of diverse people from different institutions, countries, and also stages in our career. But I'll say that most of us are probably in our early to mid-career. Okay, so to start us off, I just want to set the stage a little bit, and I'd like to characterize the field of research that we work in, that we sought to document inequities in research practice for. So, as we all know, and we've been hearing over the past few days, there's been efforts for decades now to support progress. To eliminate food insecurity and malnutrition in all its forms. Thank you. And yet, much work remains for all of us. So one of the approaches to tackle this issue is really what it needs is an interdisciplinary approach, and interdisciplinary research really it can shape some of the solutions that we utilize to eliminate food insecurity and malnutrition. And this may be a whole range of interdisciplinary researchers that work on this topic, from ag, nutrition, public health, nursing, and so forth. And yet what we see is that inequitable research practices exist, and this can also shape the kinds of solutions that we identify. And when I talk about research practice that exists, we're really talking here about how research is carried out, and what the norms are that shape whether it's material or financial and social norms among researchers, amongst communities, and also in terms of the dissemination of the work, which can all suffer from some element of inequity. So there's a growing discourse on power asymmetry in research overall, and calls decolonized global health and food systems research. Because they do lead to inequitable practices, like whether it might be helicopter research or unequal research partnerships. And it's really under this context that this team set about to think how we might be able to work better and how to address these issues, scientifically thinking through how to characterize equity across the research process and see if solutions were available in the existing literature. So to be able to do this, we conducted a scoping review. I think I have old slides up here. So I'm going to walk us through methods because I was missing a critical method slide. But anyways, our aims were to systematically identify and map the range of evidence on aspects of equity or inequity along the research continuum that have been discussed in the scientific ANH literature by different disciplines, and then to collate solutions on equitable practices that can be adopted and scaled up by institutions, individuals, and research groups. And what we did to undertake this work, which is, I think, the slide that might be missing, is we conducted a systematic scoping review. And we tapped into 5 different databases to conduct our search. And what we included were articles that were published between 2012 and 2022 in English, and that captured not only inequities more broadly that in the research, inequities in research practice, but also inequities that were related to different parts of the research continuum. The article had to talk about steps in the research continuum, and finally also needed to potentially offer some solutions. So that was our scoping review. What we got out of that were about 15,000 articles during our first search, and we dwindled that down after exclusion for full text screening to about 1,400 articles. And then through the screening process, we were left with about 572 that met the inclusion criteria. So to capture equitable and inequitable research practices, we needed to conceptualize this somehow, and we came up with this conceptual diagram, and which combines the research continuum and equity principles. So the circle really depicts this nonlinear research process that typically starts, when we formulate our research ideas or during the funding process, and it goes all the way through, if you can see that, to data sharing. And these steps along the research continuum, we're trying to center within this continuum principles of equity. And that's what you see there in the center. The 6 research equity principles in the center originated from the Canadian Global Coalition of Global Health Research. And this was developed through a participatory and evidence-based way, and which is why we utilize this framework. And equity, can be potentially defined in different ways. And so we needed something to underpin our understanding as we coded the papers. And so we use these 6 principles. One of authentic partnering, which is really recognizing and addressing power and resource imbalances through open dialogue and trust. Inclusion, which is about actively fostering inclusivity of marginalized people and perspectives. 3 was humility, acknowledging one's positionality and adopting a stance of learning versus knowing. 4 was shared benefits, so ensuring benefits that are fairly distributed across all partners involved in the research. And then 5 was a responsiveness to inequities, recognizing and addressing the historical, social, and political roots of inequities. And then finally, there was 6, which was a commitment to the future, which was really, it kind of embodies this leave no one behind SDG principle. And on the far left there, I guess, you can see institutions that really do drive this whole process, including especially funding entities, but universities and research organizations are also depicted. And so this diagram really shaped our screening and data extraction process, as well as some of our analyses. So for our results and thinking through the study setting and who is studying who, we characterized the study setting, that is where the studies were actually taking place, or where some of the articles were sort of based. And we saw primarily that these articles were set in the US, actually, with 117 of the 572 articles coming from there, or that being the setting of the work. Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa, and India were the only low and middle income countries that had more than about 10 papers on inequities in research practice. And while not shown here, though, if you separate out high-income countries and low and middle-income countries, there was actually an equal distribution on literature on this topic across both high-income and low and middle-income countries. However, on the right there, if you examine the institutional affiliation of author pairs, so first and last author pairs is what we looked at. Over 52% of author pairs, both first and last authors, were affiliated with the Global North. About 25% of last and first author pairs were affiliated with both the Global North and South. And then we had some articles that were single authors. Primarily those, a higher proportion of those were coming from the Global North. So again, these are old slides. So I also just wanted to very briefly talk about literature by evidence type and methodology, which is not what you're seeing here on this slide. But I just wanted to say broadly, I mean, I think it's just helpful for us to know that there was over half of these 572 articles actually use empirical data to document the research inequity issues in our work. And they use primary data primarily, and to a lesser extent, secondary data. So that was good to see. And as well as a third of the articles typically were using qualitative methods, about 17% were using mixed methods. And then only about 10% were using quantitative methods, which makes sense given the kind of question at play. So here we see the available literature on inequitable practices across the research continuum. And these are the 13 steps, taken out of that circle and made linear, just for clarity purposes. And across these 13 steps, fostering research partnerships, engaging the study community, setting research aims, research culture, and collecting and gathering data, as well as funder research priorities, were the most commonly depicted parts of the research continuum. And meanwhile, the least documented parts were those that pertain to grant applications, securing funding or setting up financial systems, and then also obtaining national obtaining national approvals for conduct of the research. So here, in terms of thinking about thinking through or characterizing the equity principles and what was captured most in the scoping review, primarily of the 6 equity principles, we saw authentic partnering, so that's about almost 38%, and then inclusion at 33% were the principles most characterized across the articles included. The figure on the right kind of shows you trends over time in terms of publication of the 6 equity principles. And there's really been a growing body of evidence around this topic from 2019 onwards. And again, here, there was a focus primarily on inclusion and authentic partnership. So in terms of inequitable practices by discipline, public health by far or global health by far published an exponentially higher number of articles on this topic. Compared to other disciplines like be it economics or agricultural sciences or nutrition and dietetics. Regardless, though, the principles of focus continue to be authentic partnering, and that was most characterized in the literature. Now, the good news is that there are solutions as well as target audiences for these solutions. So over a third of the articles offered solutions and practical behaviors that could be adopted and to reduce inequities in the research practice and how we work. So approximately half of the articles, about 47%, offer only a wish list in terms of what they're essentially untested or recommendations based on the author's experience. And then 20% did not offer any solutions, they just characterized the problem. But what is helpful to our community is that there are many practical, real solutions. So the solutions range from things like tools or frameworks or questions that researchers and other stakeholders can ask themselves prior to conducting research. There was also guidance for funders, reflective exercises, knowledge fairs, and collectives, all as solutions to this issue. And on the right, there is just a breakdown of more specificity in terms of the inequity issues that were addressed by these tools. Okay. So the key takeaways here are really that there is a substantial literature that exists to help us work better. Greater than 45% of there's greater than 45% of the literature documenting inequities in ANH food systems and nutrition. There is disciplines that are predominant in this literature are those from the global or public health space. There are key equity issues that are highlighted, such as authentic partnerships, and that was driven primarily in the literature by articles on engaging study communities or fostering partnerships. There's little on humility, especially written by authors from the global north, and some parts of the research continuum are definitely studied more than others. A third of the papers, as I said, offered solutions. And so, we hope that you can take that forward. Again, because of old slides, I did have a slide there where it's 572 articles. It's a scoping review. So how do you make this useful to all of you? We have a gap map that has been created that hopefully will go live this summer that sort of overlaps the research continuum as well as equity principles if you're really interested in improving your work in certain ways or also looking at tools and solutions that could help you in your work. That gap map will be available. And maybe just other points for consideration is to think about what we saw in the literature as equity is characterized differently in different ways across the different disciplines. And then that might speak to, actually that's something I was thinking about just even yesterday with the ultra processed food, is just maybe we all also have this like slightly different value base that we not always recognize, that maybe we want to be more, maybe just state. But it's just something to think about when we think about equity. Also, there appears to be a need for some literature also on issues of inequity in research practice within countries, because there was a lot on the global north-south, which completely makes sense. But we know these power structures are inherent on different levels. And then just finally, that addressing these inequitable practices requires many layers of sensitization across all the stakeholders on the research continuum, but also robust research governance solutions. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Shweta. I'm actually really glad we opened with you to kind of open the discussion with our role as researchers in inequitable practices. So Emily Vivian will now be presenting on intersectional inequalities in agriculture nutrition pathways in rural Odisha, India.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Cool. Just checking the clicker works. It's really great to have the opportunity to present to you all today. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge my co-authors, also my partner organizations, of whom logos are on the slide, and pay thanks to the donors for funding this research. So as all of us are very well aware, inequalities in agriculture and nutrition are deeply connected challenges. And these inequalities are deep-rooted in social, economic, and political power and asymmetries. Oh, apologies. Little delay, all good. So these, oh dear. Okay, cool. So these inequalities, they rarely operate in isolation. Instead, they often intersect. And the reason being is that people have multiple different identity characteristics. And these characteristics, they often intersect within really complex systems of power and oppression that shape unique opportunities, constraints, and outcomes. So in this study, we use this lens to unpack intersectional inequalities in household agricultural production to women's nutrition pathways in rural India. And this study had 3 objectives. Our first objective was to explore intersectional inequalities in household agricultural production and also women's nutrition. Our second was to explore heterogeneity in the links between agriculture and the nutrition outcomes across various intersectional social groups. And our third objective was to explore the extent to which inequalities in agriculture explain inequalities in nutrition outcomes. So our study was based in a district called Kionjar in Orissa state of India. And it's a heavily forest landlocked district with most of the population depending on farming for food and income. So we focus on two key dimensions of social inequality within this context. The first being whether or not women belong to scheduled tribes. So for those of you who aren't familiar, scheduled tribes are a constitutionally recognized group in India. They're also referred to as Adivasis and also indigenous communities. And they have faced persistent disadvantage in several domains, particularly related to their land rights. They're also the most undernourished group in Indian society. And our second social dimension that we focus on is women's education, which, as we all know very well, is a key marker of social and economic opportunity. But it is more than that. It's also a reflection of gender discrimination, as well as being a tool to overcome it. So this study uses the cross-sectional baseline data from the Upper Van trial, which some of you may be familiar with. And our nutrition outcomes that we focused on were women's BMI and also dietary diversity score. For our agriculture outcomes, we focused on household production value, so the total value of the agricultural production, and also the production diversity score. So for the first objective, we regressed each of the agriculture and nutrition outcomes on the two social identities of interest to first estimate their independent and then their combined effect through using interaction terms between the two of them. For our next objective, we then estimated the average marginal effect of each agricultural indicator on each nutrition outcome for each intersectional group. And then finally, we use potential outcomes mediation analyses to estimate the extent to which inequalities in agriculture are actually driving those inequalities in nutrition. And I'll explain a little bit more about that when we get there. So just to also mention, we use a set of pre-specified covariates within our analyses, or the main analyses, that we considered to not lie on the causal pathway between the social characteristics and the agriculture and nutrition outcomes. However, in the study, we do adjust for some further factors to aid in interpreting our results, such as land. So onto the first set of results, we found that women's scheduled tribe identity and education intersected on all the agriculture and nutrition outcomes as indicated by the, besides dietary diversity, as indicated by the presence of the interaction term. So what this meant for the agricultural outcomes, which are displayed in this panel closest to me, what we actually found is that education inequality in the agricultural outcomes was amplified among the non-scheduled tribe community compared to the scheduled tribe community, which is essentially demonstrating that perhaps formal education plays a lesser role in shaping agricultural opportunity among scheduled tribe populations. However, generally what we are seeing, although the results for agricultural production value are a bit more murky given the wide confidence intervals, which also are probably due to wide heterogeneity within the groups themselves, we are generally seeing it's this higher educated non-scheduled tribe group that have the best agricultural outcomes. And then turning to the nutrition outcomes, so starting at dietary diversity score, we see that women's higher education is protective of a higher dietary diversity score, and this has a uniform pattern across the scheduled tribe and non-scheduled tribe group. For BMI, however, we see a slightly different story. What we're seeing is actually it's only women at the intersection of multiple advantages within this context, that being those who both have higher education and also belong to the non-scheduled tribe group, that achieve a substantially healthier BMI than all the other groups. So what that means for the middle groups, those are the mix of more and less disadvantaged characteristics. It means that disadvantage associated with one characteristic is actually overpowering the advantage associated with another. And that structural disadvantage, it may take the form of women's physically demanding work, for example. So with BMI, with dietary diversity, we're seeing that women from with higher education from the scheduled tribe and non-scheduled tribe group achieve a similarly high dietary diversity score. But perhaps scheduled tribe women have to work a lot harder for that dietary diversity score, which results in a lower energy balance and subsequently a lower BMI. So on to the next objective, we found that value of agricultural production was not associated with either of our nutrition outcomes, as you can see from the forest plots. We found that production diversity was not associated with BMI, besides a slight negative association actually among this most advantaged group. For production diversity, we found a positive association between dietary diversity for all groups besides the most advantaged group. But the associations are quite weak. The effect is 0.09, which demonstrates that even if women were producing, their households were producing the maximum number of food groups out of which would be 10 food groups, their dietary diversity score would only increase by 1. So despite this weak association, we did go on to formally evaluate the extent to which inequality in production diversity drove inequality in dietary diversity using potential outcomes mediation. And the quantity of interest here is the indirect effect, which quantifies the change in the nutrition outcome that would occur if the agricultural mediator changed from its level under the intersectional group comparison variable to that under the intersectional group exposure. And given we have 4 intersectional groups, there's 6 possible comparisons, and we did run the mediation analyses for all of these. We also did account for the exposure mediator interaction as necessary, as we saw there's no effect for this higher educated non-scheduled tribe group. So when we have this exposure mediator interaction term, we estimate 2 conditional indirect effects, which I won't go into too much detail now, it's quite technical. So onto the findings. The beginning where we have the exposure mediator interaction, the most substantial indirect effect that we find is an indirect effect of 0.06 between for the comparison between higher and lower educated non-scheduled tribe women. So what this tells us is that if we were to equalize production diversity between these groups, if they had the same level of production diversity, we would reduce dietary diversity inequality, but not by a lot. It would only be eliminated, only 20% of that inequality would be eliminated by doing that. And also, when we adjusted for land size, that actually nullified that effect. So we could only equalize it via equalizing land size between the 2 groups. And similarly, for the other indirect effects, we also found that the most substantial indirect effect was 0.06, which corresponded with a potential elimination of 20% of the inequality between the 2 groups. So overall, what we find is a quite substantial disconnect between household agricultural production and women's nutrition, even among the multiply marginalized groups who often rely more on their agriculture for nutrition. And where the positive links do appear, they're really quite weak and they are socially stratified. In fact, they're absent for the higher educated non-scheduled tribe group. This is also the group that had the best nutrition outcomes and the best agriculture outcomes, which conveys an interesting paradox where we see that agriculture success is most evident where it's least essential for nutrition, which reflects the inequalities that exist in our ag food systems. So our findings demonstrate that addressing production inequalities is insufficient for addressing inequalities in women's nutrition outcomes in this context and based upon the characteristics explored in this study. And that it implies that the inequalities in women's nutrition are shaped by structural barriers outside of household production, most likely in access and affordability to nutritious diets. This implies a need for interventions beyond production-centric models, such as market-based interventions, and encouragingly, our discussions this week so far shows that a lot of us are well aligned with that very much needed agenda. And lastly, I'll just highlight that this doesn't mean nutrition-sensitive agriculture isn't important. In fact, it infers quite the opposite. We really do need to strengthen those linkages between production and people's diets. And if we do so, we may be able to reduce inequalities, particularly if they are more effective among the most vulnerable groups within our populations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Emily. I think that was such a fascinating approach and results. Next, Ravinder Kumar will be presenting on empirical evidence on interlinkages of agroecology, nutrition, and women's empowerment in Madagascar.
Okay, hi, good morning. and thank you for the earlier presentation because it is something similar I'm going to talk about. Although there are some dissimilarities also, context is very different in which this research was done. Uh, this is a research financed by Nutrition Research Facility. This is a project which Natural Resources Institute in the University of Greenwich in UK is part of for last 5-6 years. It's ending in next March. This is funded by European Union. We must say that. So we'll be looking at in this presentation two exercises that we done, baseline and endline as we call it. It's an impact evaluation of a EU program, which I'll talk about. But essentially two exercises done in 2022 and 2024, and results were analyzed in 2025. Okay, we're talking about three big things here: agroecology, women empowerment, and nutrition. All three are very vast subjects, and when you're looking at establishing, exploring, or finding out interconnections between agroecology, women empowerment, and nutrition, you have to first understand what is the framing of these three things, and that's how the research was also designed. Agroecology, a complex subject, including 11 elements, as you can see in the left-hand side diagram. But essentially, we are looked at, as part of this research, only four main elements of agroecology. Uh, as the earlier presenter was also talking about production diversity. Diversity is very much part of this research. Efficiency, resilience, uh, and another one is solidarity there. So clearly, these are the four elements which were studied in agroecology as part of this research. Uh, for nutrition, we looked at obviously the nutrition pathways, which is focused on DPENA, conceptualization of nutrition, which looked at how nutrition can improve through own production, through income, and through demand. Obviously, nutrition is influenced by food environment in terms of availability, accessibility, affordability, and desirability of nutritious food. So as part of this research, we have looked at some of these elements. Not all the elements, but some of these elements. Women empowerment, again, a very complex thing to measure. We have tried to measure it through developing a simplified approach, which was developed around four interconnected but still independent domains related to decision making, mobility, participation and leadership, access and control over resources. So across these four domains, we looked at all the existing instruments, of course, and simplified the framework of measurement as well as simplified the framework of analysis. So we're not talking about how we did it in this presentation, but if anybody is interested, we can of course share more on this. Then finally, the field research on agroecology, nutrition, and women empowerment. What we call this is an evaluative research in Madagascar. The methods we used is assessing impact of the work, a EU program, as I said, SENOI program it was called. It is a multi-sectoral program in 4 countries, but we looked at the effects in Madagascar. It was a comprehensive exercise. It was using a difference and difference kind of semi-experimental research approach. Mixed method, of course, context analysis, secondary data review, a very big, large household survey, 1695 households in 2022, which was same household was followed up in 2024. We could only find 1559 households, which is about 92%, which was also expected when we did the sampling originally. And of course, a focus group discussions. Well, this is the research context. Central Madagascar, 4 regions in Central Madagascar where the research was conducted. Women are the main actors in family farming in Madagascar, across India also. In Madagascar, improving farm resilience and integrating agriculture practices was the focus of the program in terms of improving food security and nutrition. But while women are the main actors in family farming, what we also saw is patriarchal social norms restricting women's autonomy despite their central role in agriculture. And dietary diversification, one of the things which was earlier presentation talking about, remains dependent on financial means of the household. So we'll talk about more about the findings later on. Okay, well, this is a summary picture of what we found. We'll not go into this because we need to see the interconnections. Essentially, the program itself has initiated a dynamic of change, as we said. Empirical observations based on this rigorous analysis indicate a small positive effect on agroecology and small positive effect on nutrition, but no significant effect on women empowerment. As you can see in the diagram, also the right-hand side shows effects. But importantly, when we looked at the data deeply, we realized there is agroecology threshold score and there is women empowerment threshold scores. Also, there are nutrition scores through various indicators. We realized those with higher threshold of agroecology transitions have a significantly higher likelihood of achieving MDDW, higher food group diversity scores, and also better women empowerment scores. So this was indicative because when we looked at the thresholds, which we established at 50, so threshold above 50 and threshold less than 50, there was clearly a significant marker of some interconnections of agroecology with women empowerment and with nutrition indicators. And then we saw it reverse also. When we looked at those with higher threshold of women empowerment scores have a significantly higher likelihood of achieving agroecological transitions and also somewhat higher likelihood of achieving MDDW and higher food diversity scores. In both baseline and endline data, this effect is well established, statistically significant. So it shows interconnections clearly. So there are several charts also which indicate some associations of these scores when we analyze them. And clearly there are several case studies which gives an indication of how women's roles in agriculture is so very important in terms of improving these interconnections. These interconnections are demonstrated by trust and mutual respects in agroecology there in Madagascar. Several other case studies which we looked at, one woman fennel which combined different crops on the same plots, increasing the production without increasing cultivated area. Clearly, it establishes that despite persistent financial challenges, Fano was able to adopt agroecological practices to improve her family income and nutrition. Several other examples of women where changing gender roles is strengthening the interconnections because of this particular program also of course as is happening naturally as well in the areas. So what's the lessons we can draw for improving greater interconnections between agroecology, women empowerment and nutrition? One of the things we learned is that agriculture diversification or agroecological diversification is not directly connected with dietary diversification. There are sometimes in many of the households, in some of the regions, not in all the regions of Madagascar, where households are not actually consuming what they're producing. They're selling the best part of the produce in the market. So it's very difficult to link these two things. There are cultural and behavior factors and market infrastructure related constraints as well, which are continuing to restrict the progress on improving nutrition outcomes. What we also learned from all this exercise is that future programs can improve interconnections through a thorough analysis of what are the barriers for food systems and food environment. Clearly, this research, this particular program was not based on design or understanding of food systems and food environment related barriers. Behavior change communications and well targeted nutrition specific support was also one of the way to improve the interconnections and greater impact of the program. Also, one of the things highlighted there earlier is that you have to address fundamental levers, root causes of gender inequality, which are financial literacy, land rights, leadership development, or removing barriers to mobility while addressing gender norms and access to finance and extension for women, because these are the issues which are not directly touched by the program. That's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Ravinder. I think the last two presentations had such different contexts, but very similar findings, which was interesting. Okay, so we are joined online by Temeskin Boucher from World Vision Canada, who will be presenting on the nexus between dietary diversity, adaptation of climate-smart agricultural practices, and women's decision-making agency. So,
Good morning from here, Toronto. It's 4:23 a.m. Yeah, so my presentation will be around the nexus between dietary diversity and adoption of climate-smart agricultural practices and women decision-making. Please go next slide. Yeah, again, next one. Yeah, thank you very much for the rationale for this study is dealing with about the climate change. And we already know that climate change is a threat for the human beings, especially it's affecting both the access and availability of food security and food availability. So globally, climate change is expected to reduce the agricultural productivity as high as 21%. And in some regions, when the warmer regions, it goes about 30 to 33%. The sub-Saharan Africa is mainly the most affected one, where we will be having the maize production will be reduced by 30%. And this study is happening in Ethiopia, and Ethiopia is also will be facing about nearly 70% loss in GDP per year. And Tanzania, for example, under the different scenarios, it might be losing the productivity of sorghum, maize, and the rice as 7%, 8%, and 13% respectively. So this under the medium scenario, so minimum medium scenario, like about 450 million population will be fall under the risk of food insecurity in Africa in general. Please, the next. So given that we are facing this challenge, how we can come up with the solution. Presenter, please go to the next slide. Yeah, so as we say that climate change will affect the product, not only the productivity of the agricultural produce, but also affect the diversity, because the change in climate change is also related, associated with low food micronutrient deficiencies. So as leads might be leading to days of about 500,000 additional days between 2010 to 2015. That is with undernutrition and micronutrient deficiency. So within this context, we know the women role is very critical in agricultural productivity and household nutrition. And the women are at the high risk as they are the main burden bearers, as they are producers. They are also affected by the impact of the climate change. So what's the gaps that we are trying to understand with this study is the empirical evidence how the adoption of climate smart practices and women agency can play positive role in reducing the adverse impact of the climate change. Second slide, please. So the objective is, we have three basic objectives. What's the relationship between the adoption of climate smart agricultural practice and household dietary diversity? That's the first area we want to understand. And how does the women decision-making agency can amplify the relationship either into the positive direction or negative direction? Then the other interesting part we want to see is there any optimal level of climate smart agricultural practice that can be recommended? So how many climate smart agricultural practice can be optimally yield highest return without increasing the cost of adoption? So these are the three research objective we are trying to understand. And the what's the methodology we have followed? This study is as part of a project called the Resilient We Project. This is a Global Affairs Canada funded project implemented by World Vision Ethiopia and World Vision Canada in Eastern and Western Hararghe zones of Oromia region in Ethiopia. It's implemented in 7 districts. This area is highly prone to climate change and prolonged drought affected area, and also diverse agricultural activities are happening. So this is the areas where the study is happening. Next step, please, next slide. The methodology we have used is study design. The data comes from the cross-sectional study. 1,600 women have been interviewed, and we have also identified the all possible climate smart adaptation strategies that has been practiced by the women. And the key variables for our study is dietary diversity score, especially household dietary diversity score from the score of 10, number, and the type of climate smart agricultural adaptation strategies, and the women decision making. So for the women decision making, we took up the biggest indicator when the woman is making decision at the community level, and we use that one. If the woman is able to make decision at the community level, so that can be used as she can also make decision at the household level. So that is what the key variables. And also looking for the analytical method, we do have the simple descriptive statistics where we are comparing the women who are participating in the community decision making and women who are not participating in the community decision making. So we make a simple significant t-test and a regression model, and we look at the indigenous region switching model to assess actual and counterfactual scenarios, because we understand that if the interventions are there, if the woman is participating in the woman decision making, what are the outcomes? It is obvious, we know that the outcomes are there. So we look at what if the woman is not participating in the decision making, what will be the consequence on their dietary diversity? And we also look at the scenario if we switch between the two scenarios, those who are making decision, if they couldn't have made decision, what would be happening to dietary diversity? Or those who are not making a decision could have been participated, what will be happening? Because we have one-time data, we don't have information at the different time frame. So we have the selection equation happening. So let's look at please go ahead, the second slide. So the empirical model is looking the selection in two-stage model. First, we are looking what are the determinants of participating into decision making. Then we look at what is the impact of decision making on the outcome variable. In this case, our outcome variable is dietary diversity. We have two regimes. One where the woman is making a decision and participating in decision making. Another one is if the woman is not making, if she's not participating in the decision making. So it's impossible to have the two, one woman at the two regimes. So we have, this is why we bring the indigenous region switching regression model approach. Okay, here is the results. Okay, comparison between the two groups, participant and the non-participant groups. Women who are participating in community level decision making is strongly associated with increased use of irrigation, increased use of or participation on farm activities. They are also highly likely to participate in other farming activities like fattening goats, poultry farming. All these are those who are able to make decision. They are involved highly in the in agricultural production activities. Otherwise, there is no demographic difference. So the difference coming here is mainly from the decision making or not. So the next slide, please. When we are looking at the consumption pattern, women who participate in the decision making demonstrate a statistically higher percentage of consumption of nutritious food, including fruits, roots, and tuber. This is for especially for orange flesh sweet potatoes. Now they have their knowledge around the nutritious food is increasing. Their consumption of such food categories is increasing. The meat consumption, egg consumption, and legume consumption is very high among those who are participating in the decision making. So our results are 4 results to share here. Looking at the number of climate smart adoption intensity. So on average, women adopted nearly 4 out of 13 climate smart agricultural practices. Again, those women who are participating in the community decision making, they were more likely to adopt more different type of climate smart agricultural practices. And the other result is the adoption. We can see that they have different kind of adoption strategies they have implemented using drought tolerant crop variety and livestock varieties, use of organic manure, reduced use of inorganic fertilizer. So in general, when looking at the different climate smart adoption strategies, the women, those who are participating in the decision making, they are more likely to adopt more different types of climate smart agricultural practices. Crop production, we have seen that those who are participating in the decision making more likely to grow tomatoes, sorghum, sweet potatoes, and onion. That's also reflected in the consumption pattern. And finally, the dietary diversity score. The average household dietary diversity score for women on average is around 4.5. For those who are not participating in the decision making, it is 4 out of 10. And for those who are participating in the decision making, it is about 4.7. You can see even both the participant and non-participant, the dietary diversity is low, it's below 5. But despite that fact, those who are participating in the decision making, they have higher dietary diversity than those who are not participating in the decision making. Next slide. The conclusion, women who are participating in decision making are correlated with 1 point increase in dietary diversity and 1 point more climate smart agricultural practice and production of more diversified crops. So we have a positive relationship between women participation in the decision making and dietary diversity and adoption of climate smart agriculture, and also the production of diversified crops. The final, we look at the what is the optimal number of climate smart adaptation strategies, adoption strategies that can yield positive outcomes. The maximum of 1 to 3 CSA adoption strategies can bring positive impact on the dietary diversity. Otherwise, if they are adopting more, it's not bringing a significant impact, because climate smart adaptation strategies, they are coming up with the cost. So the more they are adopting, they are earning more, incurring more cost. So it will not be counter the productivity effects. So it's evident that women empowerment through the enhanced agency has positive significant impact in reducing the impact of climate change, increase crop production, and also diversification, and also the household food diversification. The second slide. So the empirical result analysis indicated that if a non-participating woman had been involved in the community decision making, their average dietary diversity score could have been increased by at least 1 point. So it's also a similar point we got from the switching regression model. Conversely, if the women were participating in the decision making, their dietary diversity score could have been reduced by 3 points if they could not have participated. So participation in the decision making has positive impact, more likely for those who are already participating than those who are not participating. So that if they couldn't have been participating, their dietary diversity could have been reduced by 3 points. And finally, the recommendation part. Based on this study, we have 3 basic recommendations. The first one is integrating women empowerment into climate programming. Climate change adaptation strategies or programs targeting climate change should go beyond the technical solutions or providing the interventions, should promote the women empowerment, strengthen women decision-making capacity at the household level, can enhance effectiveness of the programming and ensure more inclusive and sustainable outcomes. The second recommendation is promoting an adoption of optimal number of CSA practices. Projects should focus on the promoting clear and optimal set of climate smart agricultural practice instead of recommending all available one, because that has not shown positive impact. So adopting too many practices may overburden the farmers, especially those with limited resource, and reduce the intended positive impact. So quality and the context appropriateness should be prioritized over the quantity. Recommendation number 3, embedding the nutrition education into agricultural intervention is very important. Nutrition awareness and education should be an integral part of climate smart agriculture initiative, so that households need to know what kind of crops to grow and also utilize, not only for growing, but also utilization is very important. Yeah, so that is my short presentation. I hope I'm on time. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you so much, Temesgen. Please stay with us. I know it's early there in Canada, but we have Q&A now. So, so if the panelists can all just come up and take a seat, and you're there online, great. And we have about just over 20 minutes for Q&A. So would anyone like to start us off with any questions for the panelists? Yes, please.
Femi from Nigeria. So my question is for Emily. It's actually a very interesting study, and the findings too more interesting. So two key takeaways from me from your presentation were: first, the agriculture production value does not have a significant effect on nutrition security. Then the agriculture production diversity have a significant effect on dietary diversity. So I just want to ask, do you make attempts to probably disaggregate these agriculture production diversity? At least I want to believe that the agriculture production diversity is constituted of crop and livestock production. So probably if you disaggregate this and probably run your regression, so maybe you can find a significant effect of either the crop production on nutrition security or the livestock production on nutrition security. So I would suggest and recommend you probably take it further to disaggregate. Then also this might provide a kind of informed decision in terms of policy priority, especially for the government of India. So in order to see where they should tailor in their efforts, whether it is the crop production or livestock production. Thank you.
Do you want to respond? Or?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for that suggestion. And it would be really nice to disaggregate the indicator to understand if there are certain crops that are associated stronger with the nutrition outcomes. Just want to highlight is we also know that the linkages between agriculture and nutrition are really complex, and it might be affecting the agriculture production, might be affecting nutrition of other household members, it might be affecting the children, which I didn't explore. We also know that it's possible that the income is not being used for nutrition, so people might be selling their crops, generating income from it, and not using it for nutrition. And that's where we need the nutrition sensitive agriculture interventions to strengthen those linkages, to help people produce crops that are more beneficial for their nutrition and ensure they're used for nutrition and health. Yeah, I'm very interested to disaggregate further. There's ways we can unpack this question further, looking all down the pathways and find out where that disconnect is occurring. And it's something I would like to explore, hopefully with some larger data, because it gets complicated when you've got, it gets broken down a lot, especially with sectionality component too. Thank you.
I think here first and then over there.
Thank you so much. Anne-Marie Tho from the University of Sydney. I had a question for Sweta, actually. I really enjoyed hearing about your systematic review findings, and I think what you've done is make visible the way that inequality is considered and addressed in the literature, but also made visible where it's not and how it's not. I'm curious, obviously, the literatures that you looked at, you know, agriculture, nutrition, and health, have their own publication norms. And I imagine there's also a lot of publications in what we could loosely term the development literature. And I was wondering if you had observed any differences in those kind of academic communities where maybe there could be scope to learn from between the different academic communities about how we could do this better.
Thanks, Emily. I think you've hit on like a methodological challenge of the review, which is that we were really keen because this is an interdisciplinary space. So ultimately, we did want to capture what was going on across disciplines, but it's really hard to characterize and code and decide, you know, which within this broader literature base, there's a lot of overlap. So for example, it could be that across the economics literature, like how to decide that this is coming from an economist, because there's just by virtue of where things are published. So there's different ways you can categorize, right? I mean, you can maybe look at the researcher who might have been trained in something, and as such, you're identifying them as from this discipline. It could be the department in which they are affiliated, or it could be where the article was published. But all of these have like different sources of error. So to your point, I mean, it was challenging to do, and the way in which we did it in terms of being able to characterize differences across disciplines in terms of publishing was to actually look at the journal and where it was published. Having said that, a lot of the journals nowadays also are sort of, they claim to be interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, whatever it might be. But to your point about the development piece, there was much more written across two disciplines in particular, and across the principles, and really offer deep insights in this on this topic, which I would say comes from the broader development, but also global health nursing in particular. So we ended up, combining nursing with global health, but nursing alone seems to be with a really reflective discipline on across these issues. So I think I'll leave it at that, but maybe we can chat more later. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your very insightful presentations. So my question is to Emily. Yes, your work is very interesting, and it's a two-part question actually. So first of all, I want to know how you calculated the diversity score. Then I can base off of your answer.
Oh, yeah, sure. So the diversity score was captured by a 24-hour recall, and it was using the same scoring system as for the MDDW. So it was out of the 10 food groups that are included in that.
So it was 124-hour recall?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask, do you think that it is enough to paint like a comprehensive picture of the nutritional status of your participants?
Well, we know our diversity scores are, they're limited in what they can do, particularly in terms of capturing quantity of consumption of the individual food groups. And I hopefully try to allude to some of that where we see that the differences across also women's BMI and dietary diversity, they don't say the same thing. So a more comprehensive dietary assessment would definitely be useful, particularly in the context of the conversations we've been having today around ultra-processed foods. We don't know about the consumption of the other food items, biscuits, sugary foods, and so on. And we also know they're being disproportionately consumed among the more marginalized populations. So yeah, that's something I would like to explore further, and I acknowledge the limitation of the methods that are used. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if we have one more question, maybe either for Ravinder or Temeskin, we'll take that. And then, Ravinder, okay. Yeah. And wait, just one second. And sorry. And then we're actually, Tammy has joined us. So we'll go to Tammy's presentation. But Tammy, if we can ask that you kind of cut it short, if you can give us the highlights, maybe in 5 minutes, and then we can come back to Q&A, hopefully. But yeah, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Please go ahead.
Hello? Yep, okay. No worries. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're just going to take one more question for one of the panelists, and then we'll go over to you. Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay.
So yeah, this is a question for Ravi and our presenter online. I just wanted to kind of have some of your reflections around how the gender empowerment in your studies also kind of captured the aspect of work that women do, not only in the productive system, but also in the reproductive aspect of their work. So caring for their children, caring for their household, their communities, and how, through agriculture, we can kind of conceptualize out that kind of aspect of gender. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Carola. Happy to hear that you asked this question, because there was no time to share these kinds of field experiences. When we were doing research in Madagascar, and whenever we were going to villages, we saw hardly any manfolk in the village. No men at all in the village. One or two maybe. Completely empty. So we were wondering, what's happening? Is they migrated or they're working somewhere else? What we realize is that women are not only doing farming, agriculture, as I said, the mainstay in agriculture is women, but also taking care of all other households, family, other responsibilities, and men are just going out, maybe doing wage labor, important, of course, for the family, but what else? And also many programs like these international programs coming to work and support families are largely working with women, which is a good thing, but also has this dimension of increasing workload for women. I mean, they're bringing in new practices, which is good, in fact, but clearly, I think this is an implication here all the work that is happening is supporting women, which is a good thing, but at the same time, it tends to increase workload on the women. And I think there is also this aspects which is measured related to mobility, related to leadership, and related to decision making. Even though men is up largely, I can say I could not say very confidently they're fully absent from agriculture, but still what we realize that many of the decisions when we were measuring women empowerment indicators, we realized many of these decisions are either taken jointly or taken by men. Um, so clearly there is a lot of say men still have, while women are looking after all the major functions for the family. So I think these are the reality of the situation. Really.
Temesgen, did you want to respond to that? Because I think it was directed to both of you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very important question because yes, we do have another study that we did, the paid and paid job participation for the women, and where we're looking at how the climate change is increasing the workload on the women. It's obviously it's not part of this study, but obviously it's very clear climate change has increased the workload on the women. So obviously there will be those who are fetching water, or when they are looking for food, the women are the ones who are traveling far distance, and they are also bringing more burden on the women. That is one aspect. The other aspect is because of the climate change. When the women are empowered to make decision, okay, they can have a chance to choose the type of crops they can grow or the type of food they can consume. So it's that's the advantage when you're bringing the women in the decision making power. They can decide what kind of crops they can grow, and that gives them the opportunity to, for example, in our study, we look at those women who have decision-making power. They decide to use to grow the small ruminant, the chicken and the goats, because women have more power on this kind of livestock or animals because they can sell them easily. They can keep them at home. They are the ones who are making more of the decision at household level. So the challenge is when the asset is larger assets, more valuable assets, then the main involvement is quite high. At the same time, the projects we are promoting, they have something called the main care model, where we are promoting men to share the workload from the women. For example, in Ethiopian context, they are quite heavy because women is doing everything. They are cooking. Now they are engaging how the men also can be involved in taking care of children, preparing food for the children. So women, those who have that kind of chance, they are more productive because they can have more decision making time, and also they will be involved in household production and utilization of more nutritious crops. So that is the other studies that we are also doing. We can further connect if there is any additional questions coming up.
Great, thank you. Okay, now we're going to hear from Tammy Hope, who is an independent consultant, and she will be presenting to what extent does women's empowerment in food systems affect women's dietary diversity in low and middle income countries.
Hi, my apologies for the differences in time. I got things confused by the looks of it. I'm Tammy Hope. I'm in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Lydia O'Meara and Catherine O'Mullen. We conducted a systematic review looking at to what extent does women's empowerment in food systems affect women's diet diversity scores in low and middle income countries. Okay, so we all know that the consumption of a diverse and adequate diet is essential for good nutrition and health, and that is particularly recognised as essential for women because within low and middle income countries, there's quite often a lack in their diets leading to malnutrition and numerous micronutrient deficiencies. It's also increasingly recognised that women's empowerment in low-resource agricultural dependent settings can mediate their diet quality and nutrition outcomes. Historically, though, studies have focused on the links between women's empowerment with household or child level outcomes, ignoring that specific outcome for women. So understanding how women's empowerment influences dietary outcomes is essential for shaping effective nutrition policies and programs. When we were deciding what to study with this systematic review in particular, we were looking at the domains within the indices like the Women's Empowerment in Agricultural Index and Women's Empowerment in Nutrition Index to kind of link those to see what those, to understand what domains of empowerment would have the most impact on a woman's food intake. So the research question that we came up with was, to what extent does women's empowerment directly impact women's individual diet diversity within food systems in low and middle income countries? And we were wanting to look at specifically studies that were done without interventions, without looking at those things, so that we could have a look at those grounded characteristics to determine, you know, what actually was happening there. So we followed the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews. We registered a protocol. Our population was women in low and middle income countries, as defined by the World Bank in 2022. Our exposure was women's empowerment. And obviously, as I said before, we wanted to look at that non-interventional setting as well. And our outcome was women's diet diversity score in particular, though some studies that we found did use the diet diversity score for women. We searched 3 databases, and we also hand searched recent reviews just to do with the different language used within empowerment and women's agency and that gender equality within food systems. We included quantitative and qualitative studies. Okay, so of the 293 studies that we screened, we retained 18 of those. 12 were quantitative, 4 multi-method, and 2 qualitative. Now, we found them only within a small number of regions. South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa were like the main 2 regions. And then we had 4 in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. When you zoom in on the map, you can just click on my slide for me. You can see we've got Timor down the bottom as well. So with our results, for the predictor variable, most studies employed the women's empowerment in agriculture, and half of those that used that were using the abridged version, and in particular, a couple just focused on time in particular, and also the women's empowerment in livestock indices. As I said before, the majority used the internationally standardized women's diet diversity score, with a couple that used the diet diversity score for women. Most determined an overall empowerment score that was using the gender parity index within the WEA. And obviously the finding that the more empowered the women were, the greater their diet diversity. Within this though, we found some really critical trade-offs between women's empowerment domains with their diet diversity. So as we unpacked those at those domain levels, so the 5 domains of the WEA, production, resources, income, leadership, and time, we found that there were critical nuances between women's empowerment and their diet diversity. In particular, women's decision-making power, so that ability to act as a free agent, and their workloads had a really significant impact on their diet diversity. We also found that women's time use results were very mixed and context sensitive. So we saw a potential trade-off between poverty alleviation and agricultural workloads. I think this was mentioned before when I came in, when they were answering questions as well, is, you know, if a woman has input into what she's actually deciding to do with her time, or what nutrition interventions are occurring that she needs to balance that between these things. Excuse me. So our key messages indicate that a woman's time commitment, that invisible economy, and her decision-making autonomy, that ability to act as a free agent, have a massive impact on their diet quality. If we focus on these critical areas during design and evaluation, that will allow us to maximize the effectiveness of nutrition policies and initiatives in low-resource settings. The results also highlight that importance of tailoring women's empowerment strategies to the socio-cultural context to ensure the initiatives are relative and effective. Excuse me. So we can't say what's going to work in one area will work somewhere else. My apologies. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tammy. I hope you're okay. We have time for one question for you if anybody would like to ask a question and you're up to taking it. Anybody? No? Okay, well then I think we'll just wrap here. So thanks everybody for joining. I don't know if there's any announcements to make for lunch or the next. No? Okay, we're going to make some announcements in the plenary, so please join us there. Thanks.